Welcome back to the show, and thanks for joining me on another adventure in Manitoba's Eastman region. This episode finds us exploring a couple of killer locations only a stone's throw from Lac du Bonnet. But of course, we made this route a loop because it's just too dang pretty out here not to. I've also got two good buddies joining me today. Warren, who has been my side gunner on many of the rides we've filmed and who you've met in the Broken Head Wetlands episode, and now my old friend Tyler Benny, who's jumped on his bike to join Epic Rides for the first time this season. Tyler and I go back over 25 years. We've gone on a lot of adventures together over that time, including last-second road trips, living in the mountains, and too many ill-advised safaris to parts unknown with little more than the vaguest of plans than I care to admit to. I'm excited to have both Tyler and Warren on this ride today, and I know we're going to have us a time. This trip has us rolling out of Lac du Bonnet, headed south on the 11 to Highway 211, where we'll cut east to check out the Pinawa Suspension Bridge. Next, we head back west and south on the 11 again to Whitemouth, where we're going to take a tour of the Whitemouth Municipal Museum. After that, it's chasing down to the 15 and then west all the way to the 302. Then north to the 44 and west to the 214, which will loop us back to the 11, and we'll end our day at Drifters in Lac du Bonnet. I've spent a lot of saddle time on the 11 this year, and as always, it's a beautiful ride south. This time of year is especially magical, as everything turns emerald green and the morning light is shockingly pretty as it bathes the prairies in pure gold. Unless it decides to rain, which is still pretty, especially as you watch thunderheads form and then roll over the prairies. Well, pretty and then ass-puckeringly terrifying if it's a bad storm, as there are precious few places to take shelter once out of Lac du Bonnet until you hit either Pinawa or Whitemouth. Thankfully, this morning we're going to stick with the liquid gold light and eye-popping scenery as we make our way towards Provincial Road 211. Provincial Road 211 is a short 13-kilometer stretch of road that starts at the 11 highway and ends in the town of Pinawa. The road surface here will definitely keep you on your toes as you dodge man-eating potholes and uneven surfaces. But it's gorgeous, and we're only going on the 211 for a few kilometers before heading north again, just past the Pinawa Cemetery before arriving at the trailhead. I think having the cemetery so close to the highway is likely a really good idea given the condition of the road surface. This way, when you inevitably fall into one of the giant potholes, you'll just get trebucheted from your bike over the bars and airborne until your broken and mangled corpse ends up slamming right into an open grave, saving your family from having to pay for funeral and burial costs. Seriously, Manitoba Highways Department. I understand that fixing more than 2 kilometers of infrastructure means that you'll have to bring the entire road up to the standard, and you'll have to cut into your Frisbee golf and Fabergé egg budget, but I mean, come on. Some of these roads need some immediate triage. Anyways, back at the Suspension Bridge trailhead, we learned that the Pinawa Suspension Bridge is 54 meters long and 1 meter wide. Crossing the Pinawa Channel north of the Pinawa Cemetery, the bridge is part of a loop of interpretive walks, casual fishing, and cross-country skiing. The channel which the bridge crosses is a popular destination for people looking to spend a few hours floating in tubes starting at the diversion dam just off the highway and ending at the bridge. I've never done the float before, but Tyler has, and it sounds pretty nice. Of course, my concern is that part of the float takes you past a golf course, and there's nothing stopping a bunch of drunk bro-bras from taking pot shots at the tubers from the fairway. After thoroughly exploring the bridge and the trails, we jump back on the bikes for a short trip back up to the 211 and then to the number 11 highway, before heading south again towards our destination for the day, the Whitemouth Municipal Museum. The town of Whitemouth was established in 1905 along the Canadian Pacific Railway line and provides its residents as well as neighboring town Elma with all the amenities somebody would need to live quite comfortably. The town was named after the nearby Whitemouth River, and the RM of Whitemouth incorporates the communities of Darwin, Elma, Lewis, Oldenburg, River Hills, Seven Sisters Falls, and of course the town of Whitemouth. After going on a long-winded explanation of Elma in the last episode, I'm just going to focus on the museum this time. As you roll into Whitemouth, you'll notice something unusual. Right along the road there's a tank, and a howitzer. just hanging out amongst the antique farm implements and railroad relics, as inconspicuous as a couple of turds floating in a punch bowl. When I passed by on an earlier ride, I had so many questions that I knew I was going to have to come by for a visit. Unbeknownst to us, we parked in the Whitemouth Lions Club campground, which is butted up against the museum grounds, and so we had to cross over so we could get a closer look at the tank and the howitzer before looking for the hosts of our visit, Bob and Pat Porth, who have been curating this collection for years. Bob and Pat Porth are walking encyclopedias of local history, having lived in the area for decades, and we spent a solid couple of hours with them learning about some of the incredible artifacts they have collected or had donated to them over the years. Of course, the first thing we had to ask Bob about was the military hardware.
And does the tank still run?
No, it's all closed up. It's all welded up.
I have a grinder.
Well, I do too.
It's not here, but I have it.
I do too, but apparently there's not much inside there left anymore.
Oh, okay. They gutted it pretty well.
Yeah. It's not a tank anymore. It's a monument.
Gotcha.
But the howitzer, it does work. They still use those in the mountains for bringing down avalanches.
Yeah, I saw that on the sign. That's crazy.
Yeah. They bring the avalanches down with it. So.
And it makes me wonder. Actually, I lived in Fernie for a couple of years.
Oh yeah.
Now I'm trying to think how they did their avalanche control.
Howitzer.
I wonder if they did.
Oh, that's the only thing I know.
Either that or a helicopter.
Yeah.
Well, I know that they did some of the some of the times that they did the helicopter.
They can drop an explosive in there.
Yeah.
But this is just so much more
Fun.
fun.
Yeah. I had the wrong job when I lived in Fernie.
Ski bump.
Could have been a howitzer operator.
Find the right key here.
Seeing these machines in the flesh was a pretty cool experience, despite the fact that the tank was welded shut, so there was no possibility of an Epic Rides episode where Noel rides a tank merrily to the nearest show and shine. Unless, of course, there are any military folks listening with access to tanks that are willing to let me take one for a rip. Just putting it out there. I mean, what's the worst that could possibly happen? As I was saying, Bob and Pat have collected or have had donated to the museum a ton of unique and interesting things, and it amazes me to see huge iron machinations that could still be used today, like their gargantuan stump puller, or the grindstone from the old flour mill, or the shingle mill that looks like something that the Jigsaw Killer would use in the Saw franchise.
We had some that's a grindstone. There was a flour mill in town here.
Okay.
And
wind powered?
No, it was steam powered.
Steam powered.
Steam engines on it. Yeah, big steam engine. And the mill burnt down in 1935.
Okay.
And by that time, Lake of the Woods had their big flour mill. Lake of the Woods, their Purity mill or whatever it was.
Purity,
so, so they were bringing in flour in bags by that time.
Okay.
They didn't need it. But in the original days, and before the turn of the last century, the farmers would come in from miles away, all over, and they'd bring their wheat. And they would camp on the yard, because you didn't want to take somebody else's flour, because in those days the wheat didn't mature in the time that it does now. It was 120, 130 days, so a lot of the wheat froze.
Gotcha.
And if you grind wheat out of grind flour out of frozen wheat, it won't rise. Period.
Oh.
Yeah. So the guys sat on their bags of wheat and guarded them religiously until their turn came. And that over there, that's a stump puller, and they used to tie that up to a fairly substantial tree, and you take out the cable and tie it around a tree you wanted to pull.
Yeah.
Right.
And so then across the top there was quite a large, maybe a 6x6, 8x8 pole, and you put an ox on each end, and the oxen walked around in a circle and pegged it up. It's a cable, and you pull stumps with it. You can maybe pull 1 or 2 stumps a day.
Yeah.
But the trees in this area were huge.
Right.
And you got to remember that the area was basically covered with. Part of the Homestead Act it said you came from whatever country you came in from, you could buy a homestead, 160 acres, a quarter section for $10.
Yep.
So to get title on that, you had to build a house on it. You had to have a few chickens, and you had to clear so much land.
Yep.
You had to produce so many bushels of wheat a year within 3 or 4 years. And if you did that, then the land was yours. It was yours. Well, this area was so heavily covered with timber that it was very difficult to clear 10 acres or whatever within the 3 years.
Yeah.
So the Department of Lands out of Ottawa, they said, okay, what you can do is you can raise more pigs and cattle.
Okay.
And this area is still noted for dairy farms. We've got one of the largest dairy farms in Manitoba, just
down
across
the
the
road.
river there, yeah.
Yep.
And 2 of them actually, but the one is much bigger.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but that's how they cleared land.
Among the stories about each and every antique piece of farm equipment, like the stable full of tractors that Bob has lovingly restored to working condition over the years, or to the church dating back to 1905 that Bob yanked out of the ground and had moved to the museum. One of the stories Bob shared was about Charlotte Whitehead Ross, the first lady doctor in Manitoba who picked up the nickname the Iron Rose. Not because she was a martial arts expert who single-handedly defended the town against hordes of invading mercenaries helmed by the Demon King himself, Oda Nobunaga, as I previously assumed, but because when she initially came over from England, she brought with her white roses, which everybody said would never survive the harsh climate. But because Charlotte was apparently a plant whisperer, the roses flourished. Far more interestingly to me about Ross is that in 1875, after achieving her medical certificate in Philadelphia, she moved to the RM of Whitemouth and became a practicing doctor, despite not being allowed to officially hold a medical license in the province, due to mostly sexism and because strong, intelligent women were viewed at the time as at best troublesome and at worst witches. So, still a total badass, despite the disappointing lack of glorious ninja battles. Over the years, Bob and Pat have amassed quite the collection of farm implements, including something I have never even heard of before, a peat vacuum. Apparently these things were all the rage back in the old-timey days, and once again it blows my mind the level of innovation that went into finding better ways to skin a cat.
What the people did, a lot of peat moss. Some areas the peat moss was 6-8 feet deep. Well, there's peat farms all around here, eh?
Yeah.
One at Elma, one that way.
And you'd pointed out the peat, what'd you call it?
The peat combine, the vacuum.
Yeah. You knew what that was, eh?
No, I didn't. I was looking at it, and then when I read it, then it made
okay, I guess
sense.
it's a vacuum cleaner.
It's basically a giant vacuum cleaner,
Yeah. So the first thing the farmers did was they would cut the lumber off.
Yep.
The trees, cut them down, and they would build houses or build barns out of them, whatever. There was sawmills in the area. David Ross had a big sawmill. He was cutting the timber, and he supplied most of the timber for the earliest buildings on Main Street in Winnipeg.
Okay.
Back 1880s. Yeah. And there was a list of the buildings that he supplied the timber for. So then what the farmers did was then your next best friend was fire. You burnt the peat moss off, and so now you got the roots and stuff, and you could, after a year or two, the trees would pull up relatively easy.
Right.
Yeah.
I mentioned a church earlier, and if you're into that sort of thing, Bob has an amazing story of how and why the church was moved, but you'll have to go visit the Porths to hear it. I will share a story about a priest and a ginormous bulletproof cross that Bob shared while we were visiting, though.
I guess it was before you guys came. I was telling you this cross, very heavy, solid brass. Jeez. Now the story behind this is, have a look. See the dent?
Yeah.
Right here? Yeah. Okay. No sleight of hand here. Nothing up my sleeve. Apparently, the minister of the church in 1914, 1915, in the First World War, he took that cross and he had it in his pack sack, and he was ministering to the soldiers in the trenches.
Yeah.
And I guess one day he was running across it, and he felt the shock, and he thought he was dead. I guess he dived into a foxhole. Everything since his work, And I guess he pulled across it because he was giving last rites and stuff to them. He pulled this thing out, and his pack sack was torn, and
There's a dent.
there's the bullet hit. An inch lower, he'd have been dead. He would have blown to bits. An inch higher, well, he would have been, you know.
It'd have been good for another inch, but
So
not
it's
two.
right.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, 1 inch, yeah, maybe. 2 inches, not so much.
But I guess it was enough impact that it bruised his back.
Okay.
It actually bruised his back. So, now that's a story that was told by one of the old timers here, and I was just talking to the fellow that was here before you guys came, and we agreed that if it's not true, it's still a good story.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely.
As far as I'm concerned, it's true.
Yeah.
That's too cool not to.
Yeah.
Again, no fact checking will be occurred.
No, well, I don't know.
The show isn't known for its accurate portrayals of
Well, we do
history.
know that what they call them priests, the ministers.
Yeah.
We know that the priest that was here at that time, he did go over
Right.
minister to but he came back.
I mean, I get that people like their holy relics, but hauling that bad boy into battle is next level. I mean, surely to God he could have found a smaller, lighter model to carry around, but good on him, I suppose. If the story's true, then it saved his bacon. Without a doubt, the Whitemouth Museum is truly a gem, and with hosts like Bob and Pat sharing their knowledge, I leave the museum more connected to our shared history as Manitobans than ever before. I love learning about our past, and discovering new heroes like the Iron Rose right here in my home province reminds me that while Manitoba has had a pretty dark history of land theft, slavery, residential schools, sexism, and so much more, through all of that dreadfulness, there were humans like the Iron Rose, defying the times and becoming legit Manitoban legends. Of course, there's so much more to this museum, and Bob and Pat are enthusiastic hosts to times that seem alien to me. I can't fathom what it's like to work inches from a 4-foot-tall spinning hellblade without so much as a pair of safety glasses to produce shingles for housing projects, or spend days sitting on my wheat protecting it with my life so that I can sell it to make bread. But listening to Bob and Pat tell it, I feel immersed, like I'm living it. The Whitemouth Municipal Museum should be open for visitors now, and if you're looking for a fascinating deep dive into the history of Manitoba, look no further than a visit to the museum. To learn more about the Whitemouth Museum or to book a visit, contact Bob Porth at 204-348-7731 or at museum.whitemouth@gmail.com. To check out a list of events and activities, visit whitemouthmuseum.com. I've included the museum contact info in the description below, and I do hope you check it out this summer. Leaving Whitemouth Museum behind, we head down the 11 only a few kilometers to the 15, where we head west through green pasture and brushland all the way to the 302. At the 302, just east of Enola, we head north to Beausejour. At Beausejour, it's a quick ride on the 44 to Seddon's Corner and Provincial Road 214, where we send it north and east past the Milner Ridge Correctional Facility to Highway 11 and back into Lac du Bonnet to get some fuel and a bite to eat. I want to remind everyone out there that the reason we start and end in Lac du Bonnet is because this town is a treasure. It doesn't matter where you live. Make the trip to Lac du Bonnet and stay a while. Meet some new friends before doing one of these routes. Lac du Bonnet itself is an adventure worth taking, and you won't regret a second of it. Well, that's all I've got this week, folks. I hope you enjoyed this route as much as I did. Please give this video a big ol' thumbs up and hit the subscribe button and the little bell thingy so you won't miss out on future rides. And once again, thank you for coming along for the adventure. Oh, and remember, explore often and explore local.